It looks like we have a small group tonight, but we'll still be effective, I'm sure.
Hi, Molly.
Hi, everybody.
So welcome everyone to the February 8th meeting of the Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee. I'm Alex Vidal, a policy analyst for the Department of Excise and Licenses. I'll be walking through the presentation today with some help from my coworkers. You all should have received the PowerPoint presentation. We've added a couple slides that weren't in the original, but we'll point those out when we get to them. At the end of the meeting, we'll talk a little bit about membership and renewing memberships and the roster for the committee as well. So stick around for that, but we'll go ahead and get started. So again, public comments are reserved for the end of the meeting. So if you're an attendee and not a panelist, towards the end of the meeting, we'll provide you an opportunity to speak and provide comments and input. You can also email questions and comments to my email there on the screen. And the PowerPoint presentation should be available on the Tract webpage as well. So the first section here is about our enforcement and data trends. And Molly, I'm sorry, remind me again, who normally goes through these particular slides? Is it Brian or?
Either Brian or you, whoever's ready.
This is the first time I'm walking through these, but just to give you a kind of overview, as of February 4th, we had 298 total pending applications. And you can see the breakdown there of the types of applications or where they are in the process. And then we received 388 total new applications during the month of November, 76 in December, and 227 in January. So numbers are going up there and holding strong. And then this slide here, we've got trends over the last year. You can say there's ups and downs, but for December, these are the newest numbers. We had 94 applications, new applications in December, and you can see that compared there to previous years. And then renewal applications, kind of similar, but you can see we had a lot in November, a lot of people that were renewing. Had 163 in December, and again, you can see the comparisons there to previous years. If there's any questions or comments, please let me know, but I'll just keep on moving here. And then this is a new slide here, so I'll let Brian talk about this one. We just added this slide. Brian, are you?
I don't see Brian on here yet. Is he not here yet?
Okay, let me see if he's got a. It says he's having trouble logging in, so let me get him our public link. Actually, Molly, would you mind shooting Brian the public link, and then I can promote him to a panelist, and I'll skip the slide for now. Back to it. So this is the slide that we normally put up. It's got withdrawals, closed administratively, and then calendar record requested. Oh, so that we requested when the unit was being advertised or available. And then affidavits that were sent, and then affidavits that were returned. And I think these are confirming that it's their primary residence. And there's no show cause orders right now, so that's good. This is also a new slide, but it's kind of self-explanatory. It's 311 data and trends for this year, so it's just for January. So these are questions that have come in through 311, questions about the application, general inquiries, and property complaints. And you can see property complaints is now kind of on the lower end, and we're mostly getting questions about the application. So that's another good sign that regulations are working and that our processes are working well for the city. Another new slide here, and I might have Brian go back and go through some of these in more detail, just to in case I missed anything here that he wanted to highlight. But again, very similar. This is broken down a little bit more specifically into issues about administrative citations or notices of violations that have been sent out. And you can see that you can compare them by year as well. And looks like this is just the same information, but in a table form. Any questions, comments so far?
Alex, do you know why the number is so high on applications and renewals in 2021 compared to 2019 and 2020? Just in the chart you show below the bar charts.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the reasoning for that. But yeah, you can see that it's, obviously an outlier here.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes, Brian, yeah.
I had to sign in as Alex. I couldn't find my link.
No worries. Let me pull up your slides here that you had added so we can have you walk us through those. All right, can you guys see that?
Now we can.
All right.
All right. So if you wanted to go back to Susan's question on the other slide about the number of call-ins for applications.
Oh, okay. That one?
Yeah, I would say that was a time when we've tried different processes, and that it caused a lot of confusion. So there was a lot of renewals that were happening, and the way the process was laying itself out, that people thought they had to renew right away and that they couldn't keep operating. So we had tried to adjust our strategy to address new licenses first, because those are the people that wanted to get up and running, and to kind of move renewals to the back because they could continue to operate. So it just caused a lot of delays, and people that were already in the system that weren't getting their renewals within a normal amount of time that we had to delay to address all the new applications, they were calling in a lot.
So sort of, Brian, an artificial bump, like in essence, meaning for a period of time, just a lot more calls as a result.
Right.
Okay.
Like it wasn't a matter of we were denying more, we were doing that anything organic was happening in the system. It was just a matter of how we were trying to process to get people that were applying new up and running first.
Got it.
So if we took applications in order, it would really significantly hurt new applicants.
So it's like two work streams, like a net new work stream and renewals. But if people didn't understand that and they were in the queue, they'd start calling.
Yeah. And so we've changed a couple of things in our automated emails that go out. So instead of, your application has been submitted and so on, for the renewal applications, we actually say you are allowed to continue operating. We will get back to you when we can. We have prioritized new applications first.
And does that make a difference, Brian, having a preemptive email like that go out? Does that help then mitigate the bump in all the calls?
We're seeing a significantly less amount of calls, or they're handled so much easier on email at this point.
Got it. And Brian, I have one more question for you. I got a call today from someone who's brand new, so in those net new numbers, and applied for their lodger's license. And they're called me to say, how do I go forward and apply for a short-term rental license when I don't have the physical lodger's license notification? Like they were given an automated number electronically, but not the document. And I didn't know the answer to that. Can they apply?
I would say just give the short-term rental application a try.
Okay.
Those two systems will match up, and if it has become active, whether they've received a paper copy or not, If it's active in the system, our system will know that it's active. So give
Okay.
it a shot. If it's been more than, I think Treasury is extremely fast on issuing those. There's no kind of criteria to it.
Okay.
So I think those are issued probably within 24 hours, maybe even faster. So I would say just give the short-term rental application a shot. And if that's the error that you get, shoot an email in.
Okay. Yeah, I'll recommend that. She said she got the number immediately and it's been 3 weeks with no paper copy, no
Yeah.
physical. Okay. Got it.
Just, I would say give it a shot within a couple of hours, honestly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Dana, do you have a question?
Yeah, kind of dovetailing off of what Susan had just asked. Brian, I'm curious if the process that you outlined about prioritizing new licenses, since the pending license status still allows the individual to operate, is that currently the model, the same model that you're processing renewals and applications by?
I don't understand that question. I'm sorry.
No worries. So if part of the bump that we saw in 2021 was a reflection of the renewal hosting individuals not understanding that their license wasn't being prioritized because the effort was to get new applicants into the system and licensed as a priority. If that's the same model or priority level, the way that the city is operating in 2021.
Yeah, we're still doing that. So if we talk probably once a week with the two people that are processing applications, and we kind of compare what's come in and what are the priorities. So if I looked right now, and I can look right now, let me pull it. I can pull it up in 2 seconds, I think. So our new submittals, what we call initial reviews, there are 171 new submittals that have come in that haven't been looked at yet. Looking through this list, I'd say 1, 5, 10, probably less than 20 of them are new applications. So as they come in, if they're new, we try and get to those first.
All right. So I guess the follow-up question there is, do you have data or have you tracked how long on average a renewal is taking?
No. I can get that number though.
I think it could be helpful because I know that some folks from the Mile High Host community have referenced, up to 6 months that they're waiting. And I think the main concern there is, since even though they're allowed to operate, once they lapse that 1-year mark, they're no longer within that pending approved status, and therefore it would boot them from the system. And knowing that we just saw that huge influx of applicants for new licenses in December, January.
Right.
My concern is what that could do for the timelines of folks that are trying to plan for the future.
And I'll say this, we, in the past week, I've been working pretty heavily on a plan to get everything down to 30 to 60 days.
I'll also jump in, Brian. So that statement that if you are operating on the renewal for more than a year, that might not necessarily be true always. Folks can always file extension requests for their applications so that those applications don't expire. And also there's a provision in our code that provides that they can't remain pending for more than a year unless it's outside of the applicant's control. So I believe, Brian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in these situations where the department is still processing the renewal, which is most of these situations, the person hasn't just abandoned their application. We've the city attorney's office has essentially let some folks know that they don't need to apply for a new application, that a determination is being made on their renewal application, even if it's just over a year.
And just so you know that we keep those in a status in our records that we communicate with Airbnb and VRBO and everybody else, that they are eligible licenses to be used for advertising purposes.
Thank you for the questions and thank you for the answers. Buffy, did you also have a question or comment?
Yeah, I almost forgot to mute. I was just wondering on the administrative citation and notice of violation, it's a big blank spot right at the top. Is that actually, there haven't been any, or are those just reported quarterly or something?
No, I have started issuing a couple. We've talked about this in the past. The biggest problem when we first started was the lack of people getting licenses and virtually nobody putting their license numbers on their advertisement. Those types of violations are most readily addressed with a notice of violation and administrative citation. At this point, I would say Airbnb is, from the numbers that I'm seeing, is 99.8% has a license number posted, and a pretty solid correlation for that license being at the license location. And they're obviously, I would say 92%, somewhere around there, of our business in Denver. And VRBO being the other major player, they are doing a great job of posting license numbers. And again, those license numbers correlating to the place that is licensed. So our issues that we're trying to solve are not necessarily addressed well with the notice of violation administrative citation route. So that's just, we've gone from that huge problem of nobody getting licenses and nobody posting anything to virtually everybody's posting their license number, and it's correlating really well. So the enforcement strategy, our enforcement priorities have changed, and the administrative citation isn't necessarily the best tool to use.
Okay, thank you.
And then Cindy, did you also have a question or comment?
I do. I'm beginning to see advertisements for upper end travel accommodations that appear to be large homes, that kind of thing. Inspirato, number of other companies. Is this all done under the umbrella of a major hotel corporation? Or I know we have a couple of those companies located here in Denver. Are they on our radar?
Is Inspirato the right word? Is that?
Somewhere close to that. I don't have.
Could you be talking about Espadin?
Could be.
No,
Okay.
Cindy, Inspirato is a big luxury, Brian, group that people belong to, and they pay a fee annually, and then they rent properties all around the world. They used to be primarily owned by American Express, I believe, and now are held by various other private equity investors, and they're headquartered in Denver.
So it's more of a timeshare / short-term rental thing where you rent an apartment in Nashville, but you have the ability, if that company's in Denver, to switch to Denver for a little while and kind of move around the world and do those things.
It's very much a timeshare model. You
Right.
described it.
But
exactly.
it's
Luxury timeshare.
but it's not open to the public. It's open to their members that have leased something probably in another city.
Correct.
It's a club.
Yeah.
They call it a club.
Right.
Mhm.
So those wouldn't necessarily, I couldn't imagine those being advertised on Airbnb. There'd be no kind of purpose to
No.
that. So no, I've seen a couple of them, but they haven't crossed my radar as an enforcement thing.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, from what I know, I don't think they would fit in the STR model, and I haven't looked at them.
So I wonder if they take out a lodging tax to where they're taxed in the municipalities in some manner as
Well,
lodging.
I'm not even quite sure. I'll speak off the top of my head, being dangerous here. I'm not even sure it would be lodging so much. So if I rented an apartment in Nashville that had this big building, and that same company had a big building in Denver, and I was allowed to trade with somebody for 3 or 4 months, then is it a lodging model, or is it just two people kind of trading houses?
As I understand,
Interesting.
well, I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
Understand
Cindy,
it totally, but there are some where you do trade things.
you cut out a little bit there, Cindy, but
Oh, I'm sorry. I said thank you.
oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the discussion. It's helpful to see the new trends that are kind of popping up in the short-term rental market and how they work. If we're ready to move on, I can go to the next slide.
Do we want to go back, Alex, to the previous slide that Brian was going to speak to?
Sure. Let me find this one here. So this was a new slide that Brian developed for us.
So this is, Dana, you'd asked about that slide where we were showing number of licenses, number of unique properties, and then our compliance rate. So if you look, my screen's kind of messed up here. So it used to look more like the February 22, where we had a darker line that showed the number of licenses that we had, the number of unique properties that we had, and then that bar graph that went across that showed our compliance rate. Obviously, we switched from host compliance. We didn't pick up our new software company for a little while. And then, quite honestly, I wasn't tracking kind of month to month number of properties that were being advertised. It was just not to get too into the weeds. This new software company kind of has a lot more data points that we've been trying to figure out how to use. And I would say it went from very simple with host compliance to just a lot of data points that Harmari collects. So it's been a lot of straightening out what these data points mean. And I had these numbers up, but let me see if I can pull them back up really fast.
And Brian, since the compliance rate, the licensure rate, we can't read the number there. Did you want to?
Right, I'm trying to get an exact number. Give me
Okay.
one more second. I had all these sheets up.
9:30, 3 p.m. Friday, 9:30.
While we're waiting, I'll note that we have quite a bit of public attendees today, 25. So we have more attendees than committee members, including Councilwoman Cindy Baca. So just for everyone's information.
Got it. It's coming. Gosh darn, I had all these things up before we started.
So Brian, I think the gist of it, right, is that in February, we're at about like a little between maybe a little over 80% of STRs that are advertised in Denver have a license number or have a license.
So here were my exact numbers. Number of licenses allowed to operate. So that includes active short-term rental licenses that are just purely active, those that have a pending renewal that are continued allowed to operate, 2,316. A conservative number for the number of properties being advertised is 2,645, which gives a compliance rate or a licensure rate of 87.5%.
So Brian, there's under around 13% or sub 13% that are out there that are advertising with no authorized license.
No.
No,
There
I misunderstood.
that statement is what this chart says, and I'm trying to be conservative because I do not want to put out a number that I can't back up.
Yeah.
There are probably close to 200, 220, I think the number was, of short-term rentals that are advertised that we just haven't identified yet. Most of them do have a license number associated with them. We just haven't done the research to say, here's that license number, here's where that license number is listed to, and can we confirm from pictures and other methods that this license number belongs to this house, belongs to this ad.
It's almost like license mapping in essence. It's
Right.
making sure that that license is the license associated appropriately with that property or
Right.
not. I'm
So
just trying to
there's
understand what's in that mix of that 12.5 or 13%.
There's a couple different methods of trying to figure this out. And the way we did it before was simply host compliance said there's 3,000 short-term rental advertisements out there and you have 2,500 licenses. Here's your licensure rate. What we can do now with the amount of data, again, just that more data, is say, here's 3 ads with this license number. We've confirmed that they are the same ads, whether it's Airbnb, VRBO, and then a booking ad, confirm those are the same 3 advertisements and do that. And so as new ads come up, it takes time to correlate all those pieces. So that's problem number 1. And I want to say there's about 200, 220 of those. There's another method of computing licensure rate where we take the entire universe of what we know, of what we truly know, and then the entire universe of everything that's out there. And some cities are using that, and we would come up with a compliance rate of 96%. I'm not comfortable saying that yet. So until we really, in the past month, I would say we've been really diving into the data and seeing what each of those data points truly means and what it means to us. And until I get comfortable with that, until I'm saying, okay, this I can believe these numbers and say them publicly, I'm just not going to do that. So when I run a compliance number, usually I'm coming up at, or a licensure number, I'm coming up with 92 to 96%. When Alex does it, he's coming up with the same numbers. This was my most conservative. This is what I'm comfortable saying that I can back up.
Got it. So the gap to either, somewhere between 87.5 or 87 and 92 or 93 is really in the validation process, like
Right.
how validated, if you will, against the various parameters you've established. Okay,
Yeah.
that's really helpful.
And then again, not to get into the weeds, ads come up, we classify them as something. So somebody may have an ad that they put up for 30 days and they decide, okay, this is working. And we've classified it as a 30-day and over. And then they get a license and it switches to, you know, a 1 or 2 day or a typical short-term rental license. It takes a while for everything to kind of recapture that ad and say, it was a 30-day ad. We're leaving it alone for a while because it's not affecting us. It's not a short-term rental ad. And now it is, and then kind of start that process over. So there's quite a few of those. It's just really a lot of data and figuring out what that data means and will I come onto a public meeting and say, I believe that?
And so I think we're trying to get back to reporting out on that number that we used to report out on before, where we had the licensing rate. And I think we're close and we're there. Brian's trying to get perfect and we might not get there. But we do think it's an important piece of data. And I also just want to acknowledge that we do feel it's higher than it was before. I think we were in the mid 70s when we were reporting out on it before. And I want to acknowledge that I think that's a result of the work that, we've been able to do in partnership with Airbnb and some of the other booking platforms to make sure that they're in compliance with, making sure that transactions that they're processing are licensed. So that legislation that we passed in 2021, right? 2020. Maybe it was, who knows what year is when.
February 2020.
So that I think has been effective and has, been producing the outcome that we had hoped that it would. So
Right.
I see, do you still have your hand up or is that from previous?
No, I have another question.
Okay.
What other platforms do we have an agreement with what you just explained, Molly?
We don't have an agreement with anybody. We just have the legislation that requires that booking platform, that it's unlawful for booking platforms to process unlicensed transactions.
Oh, of course, yeah. So we check with, you called it Harmari? Is that the new?
Host compliance.
Compliance, yeah. So they find all those other platforms, and that's what you have to investigate, is all different ones.
Right.
Okay,
And-
great.
And I would say there's, 2 or 3 out there that really skew the numbers also. It's Flipkey, Mr. B&B, and
Booking.com.
Booking. But again, when you look at the number of rentals happening in Denver, they're just not the major players that Airbnb and VRBO are. And like Molly said, I think Airbnb has done a terrific job of putting those license numbers on there, and every issue that we've come across, they've been very responsive. So,
And while we don't have an agreement with any of them, we do have a close working relationship with both Airbnb and Vrbo on making sure that we're sharing information so that they're informed about what properties and what licensees there are. So
Great, thank you.
so we don't run out of time.
I'll move to the next slide here, and Brian, want to run through this one real quick, or?
Just the average thing again, 12 withdrawals since the last STRAC, 43 within the past year, 330 total since we've started tracking this. 4 closed administratively, 61 within the past year. The closed administratively is when when an applicant just doesn't complete the application. So we will ask for something more, or the application's kind of incomplete. Lately, it's kind of been more of booking records. That's been a little bit of a struggle. So, oh, there it is, calendar records request. So 40, we've requested 47 since the last tract, 180 within the past year, 287 total. The affidavits.
And
same
Brian,
story.
I think I actually kind of went through the slide before when you were
Okay.
logging on. So, well, I won't make everybody go through it again. Here,
No,
but thank you for
using
that.
the same tools.
Yep. And then I don't know if you had any general comments about this. I just kind of showed the group this data as well.
So that's since 2022. I think it's going to show kind of the same trends that we've seen every other year. The most calls we're getting is about application, general inquiries, just general questions about short-term rentals, property complaints at 19. I think the next slide shows somewhat of an increase in the number of complaints that we're getting from 2021 or 2020. So 183. When we were looking at them month by month, I think that's the next slide. No, it's not.
Time.
So we noticed in 2021, we were averaging, I want to say from memory, 12 complaints a month, which, a very manageable number, I think. I think we went through 3 months where it kind of spiked to 25 to 30 a month. And we were trying to figure that out. And that's why I made this slide. And I think a lot of members have asked kind of what these complaints are about. So when I broke down all of 2021 property complaints, there were 180 that I thought were kind of valid. So we had some in there that were just, I hate the STR down the street, and they didn't give their name, and I have no idea what they were talking about. So 100 out of 180 complaints, only 24, one of the questions we ask is there a primary resident? Does somebody live on the property? Only 24 answered yes. Out of those 24, it was multiple issues. And you can see what those kind of multiple issues are. The most was noise. So again, out of the 180 kind of what I considered valid complaints where somebody named a place and gave their name or at least named a short-term rental, 138 dealt with primary residents. And 70 of those were only complaints that there is no primary resident at the property. 54 of those complaints involved multiple issues. And again, you can see safety had 3, parking had 6, trash had 5. And so, like I said, I know a lot of members have asked, can we just deal with the noise complaints? Can we just deal with the trash complaints? Out of 138 of the complaints, 70 of them were strictly nobody lives in this house. And that's what we're trying to deal with.
And then these other slides, kind of very
Hold
similar.
on.
To, oh,
Councilwoman Sawyer had a question there.
oh,
Oh, thanks, Brian. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just wanted to let you know and flag for you that DDPHE is looking at updating our noise ordinance. So you may want to touch base with them to give them some feedback on that as well. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah. We deal with each other quite a lot on the noise complaints on the bars. So
I bet you do.
I'm in those meetings also.
And then Dana, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, just one quick question. I don't know if I missed this part. Did you say that it was the complainant that was validating or making the claim that it wasn't the primary residence that was categorizing this breakdown between yes and no? It wasn't like a verified primary residence?
No, it
Part of the
was, so
complaint?
a complaint comes in and I think the first question, so 311 has a script and it's, short-term rental complaint. And I believe the first question is there somebody that lives at this property? That is there living? And that kind of breaks it down into two different categories. So that, go ahead.
Just to ask, does that not seem like kind of like an oxymoron of sorts? If somebody's out of their home short-term renting it, how would the neighbor say to somebody, because if somebody's doing a whole home rental while they're gone for a portion of the year, no one, the primary resident isn't living there at that time, right?
Well,
I don't
so
think the question is.
I guess I didn't think about it that way. So if I'm calling about, I know my neighboring house is a short-term rental. And if I say, does anybody live there? Is there a permanent, I think that's the question. Is there a permanent resident that lives there? Yes or no? I think the way you asked the question is, are they calling in a complaint like that night about a short-term rental? And I can see where your question would come from. If they're calling in a complaint just because they're saying there's a short-term rental next door to me that nobody lives at, that, has built up over the last month or two, and they finally decided to call in, then I think that's where that answer comes from.
Ready. So thank you, Brian, for all that information. Really appreciate it. This slide, again, we usually present, and I'll leave it for the group to kind of review, but it has a lot of the same kind of information that we've been going over. And this is the last slide that we normally present at the beginning, and it's the lodger's tax update. This one just has numbers for December, and then the total for 2021 for the year from the right side there. And now we'll jump into current events. First off, I just wanted to give Dana a chance to talk about the work that her group did regarding the Marshall Fire.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to share about this. So one of the amazing things to see with communities that face emergencies is the opportunity to leverage the short-term rental community. So in response to the Marshall fires, we put together an emergency accommodations program, added a page to our milehighhost.org website, where those that were affected by the fires, whether their home was burned down or they had smoke damage to their home, could fill out a form and sign up to have access to a database. So we had 75, we called them guests because that's the typical category, but 75 fire victims that had signed up for the program, and close to 120 folks from the community that were short-term rental hosts, or simply people that just had an extra bedroom in their home that signed up to have their property or the room added to that database. It was just an amazing opportunity to help those that were in a time of need and kind of in a state of shock, where they knew that a hotel room could only keep them for so long, and that they truly did need space so that they could have their family in a place that was somewhat resemblant to the home that they had just lost. So we got some great press coverage, and we're able to share that link with the folks at Excise and Councilmember Flynn, and I think Councilwoman Sita Baca as well. So thank you to all of those that did participate and share that program with others in the community.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you for telling us about that work. I appreciate your efforts. The next item here is about the legislature is considering some bills. I just want to say we don't have details on these bills. This is information that we just pulled from this article. And so I just wanted to briefly mention that There's a bill that's looking at providing state funding to incentivize short-term rentals to convert to long-term rentals. So there was a community here in Colorado that it's a city council that's paying essentially kind of like grants to have people do 6-month or year-long leases rather than the short-term rentals. And so there's some discussion about doing some state funding for a program like that. There's also a bill aimed at levying commercial property taxes on short-term rentals. Again, these are just, some of these are just even just discussions. They're not necessarily bills that have been introduced. And so I just wanted to give you kind of an idea of what they're talking about. And then the third one would require platforms to provide data to cities for enforcement. And so those are the 3 bills that are mentioned in that article. If you want to read more, go ahead and click on that article. And then nationally, just to kind of want to give you some stories here, a lot of stories about how this has been the best year ever for short-term rentals, and things are kind of coming back, and as people start to travel more and COVID starts to die down. There's also this new report, the State of Short-Term Rental Community Report. It's by another group that's working in this space, and so there's a link to that report and an article about it as well. And then just wanted to give you some articles about the different directions that short-term rentals are going. So in New Hampshire, there's a lawmaker that introduced a bill to prevent cities from banning short-term rentals. So some cities that have banned short-term rentals now are getting pushback at the state level to preempt them from doing that. A Virginia lawmaker has introduced a bill to undo local limits. So there's some cities in Virginia that have capped short-term rentals, or the number of short-term rentals in their jurisdiction. This lawmaker is looking to remove those caps. And in Arizona, they're going the opposite way. So there's an existing preemption on local cities regulating short-term rentals any differently than any other house. So no registry, they've got to be treated exactly like any other home. And now there's a bill that's been introduced to undo that preemption. So, people that have been, localities have been trending in one direction. Now there's some pushback in the opposite direction. Honolulu, we had mentioned that they were having some housing shortage issues, and we're looking at restricting short-term rentals. There was an ordinance that moved forward. I don't think it has passed yet, but it moved forward, and it would increase the minimum stay to 90 days. So essentially getting rid of short-term rentals, because at 90 days, that's really more of a short lease than a short-term rental. And then there's an article about Airbnb's anti-party system. And so it's not really a system, it's essentially rules that are set up for who can rent and when they can rent. And so if somebody I believe it's 25 years old, doesn't have an established history of positive rentals, they would not rent to that person. And then they also wouldn't do single night rentals during the holidays. And so those are just restrictions that they put in place to prevent these party houses from creating problems as they have across the country. Move on to the next slide. So just a slide about following up from our conversation last time about increasing disability access in the short-term rental market. And so the first item is gathering data. We had discussed that before. After some additional input, we are looking at adding questions to the short-term rental license about disability access. And so we're going to be looking at what types of questions make sense and when we can institute those as well. So just wanted to update the group on that. And then complaint processing. So we did look into this, and we've only received one call to 311 since we've been regulating short-term rentals, and it was a person that was complaining about the access ramp being blocked when they showed up to their short-term rental. And so we've only had one complaint. Again, that's consistent with what we thought, because most of the time you're going to call Airbnb or the host, you're not going to call the city. But we did want to set up a process so that when we do receive those types of complaints, we can pass them on to the platform and they can take the appropriate action based on their policies. And so this is a good opportunity for Aisha, our Airbnb representative, to view. The group last time had questions about how the policy is enforced. And so if you wanted to speak a little bit about the policy and how it's enforced, we'd appreciate that.
Sure. Thanks so much, Alex. Thanks for your time, and thanks to everyone who's been joining. Figured it would be helpful to give a little bit of background on Airbnb and our non-discrimination policy. I know Alex did a little bit of a deep dive in the last meeting, but I figured we could ground ourselves there, and then I'm happy to talk a little bit about operationally how we enforce the non-discrimination policy, and happy to take questions. I think there are a lot of hosts on this call that, as you all know, we're a company whose central mission is to further belonging and connection, and just like discrimination exists in the world we live in, we also do know that it exists on our platform. And so we do it, that's a significant flag to us, and it's work we want to continue to focus on addressing. Since 2016, we've removed 1.3 million people from the platform itself for declining to treat others without judgment or bias, but we know that that was just a start, and that work is ongoing. In June 2020, we announced Project Lighthouse, which we are carrying forward with Colors of Change and the NAACP in partnership with a lot of privacy organizations and civil rights orgs. And the idea there is to use a privacy-centric methodology to help Airbnb identify and eliminate disparities in how our Black users and people of color are experiencing Airbnb. It focuses on a range of challenges, but primarily in the pre-booking world. So when guests are looking for listings, when they're looking to book one, if a host is accepting a reservation. And so that's work that's going to continue to be resourced. We just staffed that team up significantly in the last 6 months, and we're continuing to fill that space up, but really, really concerned about discrimination on the platform from the pre-booking stage to really doing a deeper dive into our operational processes for how we monitor and evaluate the non-discrimination violations that come our way. I know the questions for this group were more just operationally, what happens when an action occurs during the course of a reservation? What does Airbnb do? Situationally, this translates into a user usually reaching out, claiming discrimination, and their first point of contact is usually our customer support team. The customer support team then triages that flag to a specialized team that exists. And we have a team that exists specifically for potential violations to our non-discrimination agreement. That team will then take that case on and then do their own investigation. And so this includes direct calls with the guests. It includes a call with the host. It includes a deep dive into the message thread itself, because what we found is the majority of communication is happening in that message thread. And that team also then has a rubric and an action mapping sequence that takes place. So they take all the information in, and they come up with their own understanding of what happened during this specific situation, and it maps against an outcome.
Yeah,
and that outcome can vary, I would say, based on the severity of the violation itself. And it can go from anything from an initial warning to additional education of what specifically Airbnb's non-discrimination policy is. And it goes all the way to potential account removal. And so that is an action that's definitely taken place, and actually we think in certain situations absolutely call for it. And then there are a host of options in between. We also have flagging systems in place for hosts who we start to find there are repeat violations happening against a particular host. And so those hosts that then fall into that bucket where we see a series of repeat violations, the escalation process for those hosts is slightly different. And then again, can lead to account removal. So it really is situation specific, but we definitely want to continue to monitor this. And so even on the city side, saying that 311 received a complaint, feel free to forward that information over to us, and I can get it over to our team and see if we can find out anything on how that account was actioned. I can pause there and take any questions.
Okay, I sure appreciate you coming and telling us about the policy and how it's enforced. Just give a second here in case there's any questions.
Not really. No, it wasn't bad. It was.
Hey, Daniel, I think you're unmuted. Maybe mute, Daniel. Thank you.
So it doesn't look like there's any questions right now, but if you do have questions, please let us know, and we will make sure that Aisha gets them and we get answers back, and keep continuing this conversation. Appreciate.
And I'm also happy to send along some links on Project Lighthouse and that announcement and a few follow-up public facing things we've said about it, just so folks have it.
Sure, that'd be great.
It looks like Buffy did just raise her hand.
Oh, Buffy.
I'm always forgetting to unmute. I saw that Michelle Mencken was deplatformed from, and her husband from Airbnb, and I wondered if that was going to be reconsidered at all. I think it was under a, well, I don't know if it was under discrimination, but it does seem like it's somewhat discriminatory. I mean, she's a Filipino woman, I believe, and she was deplatformed from Airbnb. You know, she can't make any reservations.
Yeah, I don't know about her case off the top of my head, but I'm happy to do some digging and circle back with you, Buffy.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I think also with the caveat that this is like personally identifiable information, so specific instances of like what exactly happened, I probably won't be able to go into a ton of detail, but I'm happy to just do some initial digging. And I'll let you know what I find.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm really glad that we're making this connection and can keep collaborating on this issue. And then the next follow-up item was just, we talked about promoting education through the private market itself. And so we'll continue to, serve as kind of a sounding board or a hub of those kinds of efforts. If other, I know Dana, you had mentioned working on something like this and connecting with Councilman Hines. I did email with him and we had some follow-up. And so I don't know if you've had a chance to connect with him or not, or if there's any been any progress on that side of things or anything, any updates, but
Not yet, but it's on our 2022 calendar goals.
great, excellent. And then also for STRAC, as part of our renewal and replacement for members on the committee, we are going to be intentionally looking for, as we did in the past, but again, renewing our intention to find candidates that can represent the disability access community so that we have that voice here on the committee as well. And then this meeting wanted to talk a little bit about the impact that short-term rentals have on the housing market. I think we should have time to go through it, but I'll try and be as concise as possible. And so I wanted to share this study that we found that was brought to our attention. The title of it is "The Battle for Homes: How Does Home Sharing Disrupt Local Residential Markets?" It's a study drafted by graduate students at the University of Arizona, Purdue University, and University of Denver. And actually one of them is a short-term rental host here in Denver, and that's how that was shared with us. The study is not specific to Denver. Actually, Denver is not included, but some of the conclusions we can use in our work here. And so that's kind of the overview, but some of the conclusions from the paper are that first off, that residential property is generally occupied by the owner or renter. So it's not very common for somebody to buy a home or structure that's meant to be a residential dwelling and just leave it empty. Normally you're going to live there or you're going to rent it out. If you buy land or some other type of property, people sometimes just sit on it and don't do anything with it. But when we're talking about housing, generally it's going to be occupied. Short-term rentals provide a new source of revenue for folks that own residential property. So you can live in it, you can long-term rent it, but now you can short-term rent it. Before, the costs of short-term renting were high, right? You had to do advertisements on your own, you had to do cleaning, you had to, dealing with a lot of guests was created a barrier. But now with the platforms, those costs are way, way down. And so it's very easy for somebody to list their property, rent it out, get it cleaned between rentals. And so that's now created a very attractive, very simple, very easy new form of revenue. So when people are buying property, whether it's a bank or a person, they now can consider this new source of revenue that they might use. So for example, in Arizona, I know I bring this up a lot, there were investment banks that were buying up 3, 4, 5 properties on the same street, converting them to short-term rentals. And obviously nobody lived there and they weren't being long-term rented, they were only being short-term rented. So again, it creates a new revenue source for owners of residential property. Short-term rentals do reduce housing stock by removing housing options from the market. Again, that's if no one lives there. So if someone's bought a home and they're not living there and they're just short-term renting it, it removes an option for them or another long-term rental, basically a resident of the city having that option. Now it's an option. Generally, it's going to be for somebody out of town or that just has a on vacation, something like that. But short-term rentals increase home values by allowing this additional revenue stream that I've been talking about. So it generally is going to increase if you can short-term rent your property. That's adds value to the home. And so a national study that was cited in this study found that a 10% increase in the amount of short-term rentals in an area was associated with a 0.5 increase in rent and a 0.75% increase in home values. And that they sort of increased in tandem. And so it wasn't that it was better for owners and, they rents and values went up kind of simultaneously. And what they used here was what they called a one host, one home policy. And so there were some cities across the country that they had passed legislation saying any one person can only rent one short-term rental. So it's very similar. It's similar to ours, but less restrictive because I could own 2 homes or 3 or 4, and I could rent one of them. I'd be allowed to rent one of them, and I could live in another property. Our ordinance says that you have to live. It has to be your primary residence when you rent it. And so this study found that what they did was they compared cities that didn't have a one host, one home policy with cities that did have this policy, and Airbnb actually instituted the policy through the legislation. So it would have been enforced equally in all the cities that had the one host, one home policy. It was basically for every person, you could only rent one home on a short-term basis. And cities that had the one home, one host policy saw lower increases in home values and rents. And so it kept rents down by restricting how many short-term rentals an owner could rent. Our policy is actually more restrictive because, again, we're not taking any housing stock off the market because we're requiring somebody to live there on a long-term basis, even when they rent it short-term on occasion. And as previously discussed, the way the ordinance was developed, the idea was not to establish a set number of days that it could be short-term rented, but rather focus on the primary residence requirement, and that's that somebody does live there. And so then I wanted to kind of further this conversation by talking about a study that DATO did, that's Denver Economic Development Office, in 2019, and this one is specific to Denver. Again, generally, one of the first comments in the study is that housing prices are rising rapidly everywhere, and it's difficult to discern how short-term rentals are impacting the market, apart from all the other factors that are increasing housing values and rents. Our primary residence prevents housing stock loss, and they also found that 1% of the housing stock in the city is short-term rentals. So they looked at, I believe it was American Community Survey data that looked at all the housing stock in the city, housing units, and then how many are short-term rental, and it was 1%. So the fact that we require it to be a primary residence and that only 1% of our housing stock is short-term rentals, they concluded that it's unlikely that short-term rentals are having a citywide impact on home values and rents. But they did note that increased concentration may have an impact at the census tract level. So when you get, it might have a more localized effect. And so they found a moderate correlation between short-term rental concentration and home value increases, and a weak positive correlation between short-term rental concentration and rent increases. And you can see those numbers there. So if it were a 1, that would be a 1-to-1 ratio. So it would be a perfect correlation. This is a 0.329, so moderate. And then the rent increases, it was a 0.033, so relatively weak. Home value, but another item to consider is that home values correlate with desirability. And so high value areas have historically seen larger increases in values and rents. And this may attract more STR activity. So it's kind of a chicken and egg. Is it that places that are more desirable, that are seeing increases in home values and rents, are more attractive, and therefore they're attracting more short-term rental activity, right? Places, you know, near there are near amenities and things like that. Or is it the short-term rentals that are driving the home value and rent increases? And so it's kind of it's hard to tell. Again, a correlation is not causation, so it's hard to tell which is driving which, but that's something that should be kept in mind. And their final conclusions, but short-term rentals don't appear to have an impact on housing costs at the citywide level. But when you go down into the census tract level, there may be a local impact. And I wanted to highlight that the primary residence requirement is critical to preventing housing stock loss that could lead to price increases, and that EXL has worked very hard on that in particular, because we know that it was critical to the city when it passed the ordinance that be included, and that we know now from studies like this that it's helping keep costs down for our housing. And then just for kind of interesting facts, again from Arizona, Sedona is their estimates that they have between 25 and 40% of their housing stock is short-term rentals. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's happened when you don't have smart regulations like what we have here with the primary residence requirement. I remember looking at Denver as a model for what we could do when I was in Arizona, pushing for more regulation. And so really glad to see that that it ties together with the goals of the city. And then finally, the short-term rental rates at the census tract level here in Denver range from 0 to 4.3%. So again, on average for the whole city, it's 1%. But when you go down into like the census tract neighborhood level, there are some neighborhoods with 0 short-term rentals and some that have up to 4% short-term rentals. And then this next slide shows you, I'm not going to read it all, but you can see by neighborhood. What we had our data analysts do is take neighborhood population data and neighborhood short-term rental data and give a per 1,000 people rate. So this top category is there are more than 10 short-term rentals per 1,000 people in that neighborhood. And so you can see there's 8 total neighborhoods that have that level of concentration. There are 13 neighborhoods that have between 5 and 10 short-term rentals per 1,000 people. You can see the kind of the bulk are in this 1 to 5 category. And then there's 4 neighborhoods that have no identified short-term rentals. There's different ways to show this data, but I thought it would be interesting, folks might be interested in reading where their neighborhood kind of fits. Couple more slides. We had gotten some questions about different data that we have, and this is the type of short-term rental. So if it's for the entire place or just for a room, and you can see the vast majority, over 86% are for the entire place rather than just a room. That seems to be the trend and the model, and the reason why people rent is to have the entire place to themselves. And this one shows the number of bedrooms at the different licensed STRs. And you can see 1 bedrooms or make up more than half. So it could be studios, could be, I don't know if studios would fall into 0 rooms or into the 1 bedroom category, but lots in that 1 bedroom category. And then 2 and 3 bedrooms are probably going to be more houses. And then obviously there's fewer and fewer houses that have more than 4 bedrooms. And then the property types, we also looked at whether it was a house or a condo. Commercial, I think, is going to be like apartments and things of that nature. They're in a commercial size building. And you'll notice that this is an estimate that we calculated separately. So this is not going to add up to 100 if you include this ADU estimate. That was done by searching the term ADU and whether it was included in the application and or if it had a half address. So that's how we arrived at that. Then there's about 3% of short-term rentals are for ADUs. And so that is the presentation for this group. If there are any comments, questions, anything like that we want to get to before we talk about the next meeting. Cindy, I see you've got your hand up.
I do. Is there any correlation that you've seen between the complaints and the density of the neighborhood? Or have you delved that deeply into it?
We've not looked that deeply into it. I don't know if anecdotally, I don't know if Brian or his team has any kind of testing, anything like that, but I don't think we've gone that deep into it, no.
Mhm.
No, I haven't.
Thank you.
And then I think Erin had her hands up, but it looks like she put it down. So if there's no more comments or questions, I'll just mention that our next meetings are, the next one's going to be in May. As we mentioned previously, we're going to go to a quarterly schedule. So have a little bit more time between meetings to gather information and see trends that are coming out. And I did want to mention about renewal and keeping people on the committee. So I did send out an email to everyone I hadn't heard from, and I think I've now heard from everyone about whether they want to stay on the committee or want to step down. If you haven't, let us know either way. Please email me so we can know if we need to replace your seat or if you're going to be staying on. And also to those public attendees that are listening in, we probably will be recruiting for new members in the near future. And so stay tuned for opportunities to join the committee as well. I think that's all I had before we move to public comment. Molly, Brian, Erica, anything else to add before we go into public comment? I think we have one public commenter.
No, nothing from me.
Molly, I just wondered if it might be useful to circle back at one of our next meetings to the work that the zoning team is doing that Abe and Josh and team presented a few months back, kind of laying the groundwork for a task force and beginning to look at, zoning and Denver modeling by comparing ourselves to other like cities that have updated like Blueprint Denver. So I'm just wondering if that's already in your kind of in the foreground that you're thinking about it, or is that something that we could ask maybe at the appropriate time to have a revisit of that topic?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We can definitely check in with Josh and Abe and see where they're at in establishing their task force and, moving forward on that project. I definitely think that this is a good forum for them to be communicating out information and also gathering feedback. So we can see if the next meeting, which I think was May, is an appropriate time, if that works in their schedule as far as where they're at in their project. But yeah, we'll check in with them about that.
Super, thanks.
Thanks, Susan. All right, so it looks like we have 4 public commenters now, and so I will start a timer. Just have that ready to go. So the first one up is Alex Dodd. Alex, can you hear us? Are you?
I believe so. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Alex. So I'll start your timer now. You have 2 minutes.
Cool. Thanks, Alex. And to the committee too for dedicating your time and efforts toward this. Really interesting deck today, and welcome aboard, Alex, as well. Well, I'm kind of questioning. It's a compelling study, and I admit just since it was presented today, I haven't had a time to delve into that study. It's pretty lengthy, but I did skim it. And I think some of the bullet points were accurate from on the slide deck there. And a couple of the standouts to me were that short-term rentals do not impact housing prices on a citywide level. And this is kind of echoing, I believe it was the 2016 internal study that the city also presented. And also too, that there's a market trend that more desirable areas have more noticeable increases in properties and like more STR activity as well too. So then all of this is kind of bundled up in the fact that this is a national study and that every market's tremendously unique. I would just kind of question the relevancy of this from a policy standpoint, and kind of dovetailing this in. We've seen a lot of in the news about sanctioned homeless campsites. The 8th and Lottie site's been getting a lot of press lately. I'm inclined as a, an active member of the host community and a short-term rental host myself, and Denver native. Perhaps there's an opportunity to allow the short-term rental community to be more solution-oriented with affordable housing and the homeless crisis here that we're seeing a huge increase in Denver, something like 26% since the beginning of the pandemic. Is this something that the committee feels there's an opportunity for, and perhaps anybody on the committee would want to champion as a cause? Any type of affordable housing, or any way that the community could potentially help with this?
So just to clarify, Alex, and we're at time there for your comments, but are you saying opportunities for short-term rental hosts to help with affordable housing? Is that?
Yeah, and I apologize. That was kind of a multifaceted question there. I didn't mean to be confusing, but I guess first and foremost, I just kind of question the relevancy of the study, and I take it by the fact that it was presented in the slide deck that this is something that's being considered from a policy standpoint, and then perhaps shifting that focus toward what can the short-term rental community do? What could our lodgers tax do? I know this is probably a higher level conversation that would need to be initiated by council or similar, but is this something more just on the roadmap or for goals that the committee feels would be appropriate, rather than just kind of ruminating over studies that may or may not be relevant?
I see. Yeah, I think that members of the committee definitely will take your comments into consideration and see if there's interest and creativity or opportunities that we might be able to leverage. This is an advisory committee, so we do provide recommendations, and as you mentioned, that would be a higher level conversation. I don't know if any members have any comments now, or since you just mentioned it now, it might be probably need a little bit of time to kind of think this through a little bit. And then just the study in response to the study stuff, it was a 2019 study, and that was more kind of, it didn't drive policy in my understanding. It was because the policy was instituted, I believe, in 2016, and so the study was more examining kind of the effects of the policy. So it was sort of evaluating rather than driving the policy. But in terms of your suggestion of how short-term rentals can get engaged in the affordable housing conversation, I think that's a novel idea, and it'd be great for this committee to consider it and to discuss it further. Alex, your 2 minutes are up, so I'm going to put you on mute, but I'm just going to give a second here in case the committee members have any comments about your comments.
It does look like Councilwoman Sawyer has her hand up.
Oh, okay.
So I want to respond to that, Councilwoman?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to, say thanks for those comments. They were really interesting, and I'm glad you brought them up. Happy to look into that a little bit further. We'll just flag that the lodgers tax, because it's a tax, was voted on by the people, and has a very specific set of locations that it is, where, when we're talking about money flow, where it flows to. And so, if there's overage there, it does, I believe, go into the general fund, which is then distributed, to all of the different things that the city budget annually funds, including affordable housing options. So just wanted to flag that, but wanted to also just, make it clear that as a tax, it's something that the voters have voted on and discussed. And so it's kind of not the same, it doesn't have the same flexibility that other solutions might have. Thanks.
Yeah, and we did a meeting on the lodgers tax a couple of years ago. So we can, I'm sure it's on the website, but we can pull which one that was out and send it along to the committee, and maybe highlight it on the website, or pull it to the top a little bit, so that people have some information and background on the lodgers tax and how it's allocated. Should we move on to the next public comment, Alex?
Yes. So thank you for that input, and we'll definitely see what we can come up with. Next person is Danielle Anderson from Waterstone Mortgage. Danielle, can you hear us, and can you test your microphone for us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And I'll start your 2 minutes now.
Okay. My comment was around how the landscape has changed for millions of individuals where working from home is now more of an option. And I'm one of those individuals that I call Denver my home. It's my primary place of return. It's where my habitation is fixed. I feel that the enforcement department views me differently and more criminally because my use of a primary residence might be different from someone who drives every day to the same office, takes their kids to school. My ask is that the enforcement department recognizes those that are similar to me, where my number of days may be greater than others, but my car is parked in my garage, my clothes are in boxes. I've lived in Denver for 5 years. It's been my place that I call home. It's where my friends are. But just because I might take a 4-month trip working and traveling in South America, that I might visit my sister in Houston, that I might take other vacations and rent out my home, and short-term renting finances some of those. It allows me to own a home and thrive in a lifestyle that I choose to, and it doesn't make me a criminal for someone that is abiding by the current ordinance language, where there isn't a limited number of days. And so the calendar requests have become much more frequent, and I feel like it's targeting people like me. And when we have no 183-day language in the ordinance, sometimes the overreach on the enforcement seems very harsh and very invasive to my privacy and to those of others that have spoken up in our communities. So I just wanted to say my comments that, just because I might not be in my home every single day, like, it is my home and it is my primary place of return. And I would just like them to think about that.
Great timing, Danielle. You're right at time. Appreciate your comments. I'm gonna mute you now because your time's over, and then I don't know if we want to, if there's any comments there, or if we want to move on to the next speaker. Thank you for your input.
Oh, go ahead. I think we can move on to the next two public commenters so that we can make sure we have time, and then I can address maybe that topic at the end if there's a couple of minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Molly. The next person is Sabrina Callanan from B&B Excellent. Sabrina, can you hear us, and can you test your microphone for us?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. And Sabrina, your time starts now.
Thank you so much. One thing I just want to mention quickly is in all of these short-term rental studies, the stats were point percentages of increases in rents and increases in value based on the effect of short-term rentals, but we are seeing a 15 to 20% increase in long-term rents here in the Denver metro area. So short-term rental is, by those stats, just a very small portion of that. One thing I do want to mention is that I do have a number of clients who have accessory units, either basement units or carriage houses, who have come into question with regards to maybe they're zoned appropriately, but no use permit was pulled, and they are being held up in the renewal process or not getting renewed at all. And, Abe and his team have mentioned that they're working very hard to make it easier to permit these accessory dwelling units and to build these accessory dwelling units to help build the housing stock. And so, my thought is twofold. Number one, if homeowners are renting out accessory units as short-term rentals, it helps them afford to live in Denver because that income helps go towards their living expenses. But then next, we're looking at licensing and inspecting long-term rentals as well. And if those long-term rentals are held to the same standards and homeowners are being forced to stop using mother-in-law suites and carriage houses as housing, then that will be reducing the affordable housing stock overall. So I think it's really important that we carefully look at trying to make these accessory units available for people to use, and whether or not we continue to allow people to use them as short-term rentals, it should be determined, but it shouldn't be determined based on zoning. These properties should be available for use as long as they're livable. And I believe that will help increase the affordability here in Denver, not only by increasing the stock, but allowing homeowners to use that income to afford to live in Denver.
Thank you, Sabrina. Appreciate your input. Any comments from the committee?
I'll just throw in a quick response there. I completely agree with you on most of that. My concern has been primarily the carriage houses or units that have been done without permits. And that's, I would say, where 90% of my focus has been in terms of finding these, whatever we want to call them, outbuildings, detached buildings, ADUs, things like that, that people have kind of finished themselves over time. And my concern has been the city kind of issuing a license that says you are good to go in terms of renting this, but none of these have been inspected for safety or anything like that. So as you're hearing that from your clients, just know that may have been the concern rather than the zoning of the building.
Thank you, Brian.
Does that make?
I was just going to add, there's some clear guidance out there, and we put out a bulletin recently clarifying and adding additional information around how and when ADUs can be used as a short-term rental. So if there's additional questions, we're always happy to help navigate or, get people in touch with community planning and development. But ADUs are allowed to be short-term rentals as long as they follow the guidelines, and so will long-term rentals as long as they are legally established and permitted.
Thank you. And then our last public commenter is Jasmine Slivka. Jasmine, can you hear us, and can you test your microphone for us?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Your time will start now.
All right, great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jasmine, and I own a 1-bedroom in Denver that I short-term rent when I'm not there. I have a legal license, and I comply with all of the rules outlined in the Denver Code of Ordinances. I'm also a product manager for host compliance owned by Granicus, headquartered in Denver, and my responsibility is the STR compliant software. I'm keenly aware of what is required to be a legal operating short-term rental, and I work with nearly 400 municipalities around the country on how to improve their management, oversight, and enforcement of short-term rentals. As a short-term rental owner and someone whose full-time job is also in this space, I've never seen a municipality launch investigations or spend time on the types of enforcement practices that Denver does. After living in the property full-time most recently from October through December, I began taking rentals again in January. To my surprise, a city employee stopped by my property around 10 a.m. on January 28th, interrupting the stay of one of my paying guests. The city employee asked my guest, who I've never spoken with and only transacted with on Airbnb, point blank if it seemed like the host lived there, asking specific questions like, did I leave food behind? Or are there personal belongings in the property? I don't tell my guests about my personal situation, so they're unaware if I have personal belongings. I throw all my perishables away, and I store my personal belongings in my backyard shed when I'm gone. For most STR hosts, we take short-term renting very seriously and professionally. And if Denver's only evidence is if my paying guests think I live there or not, that is quite a misleading practice I've not seen used anywhere else in the country. We don't have a concept of an occupancy limit in Denver, but if we did, and let's just say I lived there 50% of the year, if this was the city's only method of determining when a homeowner is home, just random flyby inspections, they will statistically miss 50% of the time. My property's never had a complaint, citation, or fine. I return to Denver often. That's where my job, my doctors, my vet, my friends are, my neighbors see me often, and I keep my personal belongings on the property. There are ways in which jurisdictions more specifically define primary residence, which I would recommend, typically occupancy limits to reduce this kind of ambiguity. Just to be clear, the flyby visit itself from my own property was very unnerving and upset me and my guest. My recommendation if Denver has concerns, there should be an attempt first and foremost to contact a property owner directly for supporting evidence. And I think the lack of communication by Denver and the sneaky inspection and investigation practices are divisive with the legal STR community and should end. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Jasmine.
So we're a minute over, but I'll respond, I think, to this one, and I think it goes with Danielle's comments a little bit too. I think that was the right person. Getting a license in Denver to short-term rent your house is a privilege, and it's a business, a public business. And so conducting inspections is going to be something that we do, and they are, we make them as transparent and accountable as possible. And it's just a result of opening up your home to the public is going to also, you know, you've come to the city, you've requested a license. And we looked at occupancy limits. When we talked about the primary residence requirement, we looked at different criteria like that. And it was communicated to us that that was not something that the host industry was interested in or something that was acceptable to them. So we, you know, in partnership with this committee and through lots of different public stakeholder meetings, went a different direction than the occupancy limits or day requirement. And so this is the result of, you know, what we have to do to determine whether a short-term rental is occupied by a primary resident or not. You know, they are time intensive. They are, you know, a significant use of our resources and our time. But I also think what it demonstrates to us is that there are a significant number of people out there that don't actually live at their property, that they are short-term renting. There are investigations that we have to conduct on a regular basis to make these determinations. Because red flags and are brought to us on a regular basis, whether that's through a complaint by a neighbor or documents that don't match up when people are applying for their license or renewal. So these are the types of investigations that we have to do. I am happy to speak further with Jasmine or Danielle or anybody that has concerns about our investigation process. But that is, you know, because primary residence is such a core value of our short-term rental program, and because of the study that Alex mentioned around, you know, the connection to the enforcement of the primary residence requirement to affordability, and because affordability is such an issue in Denver now more than ever, it is an important value that we are going to continue to uphold and enforce strongly. So happy, I know a couple maybe committee members had their hands up. I'm happy to stay another couple of minutes if people would like to, and then maybe we can continue this on at future meeting agendas as well. So
looks like Dana has her hand up, and that's the only hand that I see up is Dana.
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is I understand enforcing and investigating a primary residence, but questioning a guest and asking them, is there enough food in the fridge and enough clothes in the closet? That's the part that makes me as a community member really uneasy. And that's what I guess I would ask if that is something that is expected, so that the guests would not be completely uncomfortable with the fact that they have a city, employee coming to ask them those types of questions.
I mean, I guess the other thing I would say, Dana, is we go into all the businesses that we license and we check to make sure they're in compliance with all the different requirements. We have various techniques and strategies that we use to do that. And for short-term rentals, this is the one that we have found gives us the best information. We have various techniques that we use, whether that's asking for documents upon renewal, and we do that type of research. But if we need to do follow-up and request or dig a little deeper and find additional information, that is one strategy that we do use, and it works.
And I'd also just follow up with that too, just to note that that's just one tool in the toolbox, right? It's not all based on the answers that a guest might give. Brian might be going out to these places last type of thing for him to study, right? He might have already talked to neighbors. He might have already looked through any documentation that might have been submitted with the application. And this is just a final act to figure out whether or not this is a person's primary residence. So there's a lot that goes into these investigations that we probably could spend hours talking about, whether or not this is the appropriate place to do that, and whether or not you all are the appropriate people to do that with, is another question. But I think that it's important to note that it's not all based on what type of conversations might be had with one of your guests.
Good point.
Well, thank you everybody for the conversation, the input, the questions. I really appreciate us diving into these issues so we can understand them better and provide good recommendations and advice. I think that is the end of the meeting. Molly, did you have any closing comments or?
No, just that I obviously feel passionately about the last topic of conversation. So like I said, happy to continue the conversation, and I agree with Reggie around whether this is the right forum to have that conversation. These are, investigations that we conduct as the licensing authority. And, we try to be as accountable and transparent as possible, and we will continue to do that. But also, have to find ways to enforce the requirements that are there. So, no, again, enjoy these conversations regularly, and happy to, continue talking with you all. And then, like Alex said, I think several of you may be, opting to not continue your service on this track. And so just to thank you to those of you that have served and will no longer be continuing to sit on the committee. You're always welcome to come back and attend as a public attendee, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in that way, and just appreciate all of your input and service over the last couple of years on these important topics. So thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks everyone. Have a great night. Bye-bye.